Section 28 of Little Journeys to the Homes of the Great, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Erin Schellhase. Little Journeys to the Homes of the Great, Volume 1, by Elbert Hubbard. William Shakespeare, Part 1. It is a melancholy of mine own, compounded of many simples, extracted from many objects, and indeed the sundry contemplation of my travels, in which my often rumination wraps me in a most humorous sadness. As you like it. William Shakespeare. I have on several occasions been to the Shakespeare country, approaching it from different directions, but each time I am set down at Leamington. Perhaps this is by some act of Parliament. I really do not know. Anyway, I have ceased to kick against the pricks, and now meekly accept my fate. Leamington seems largely under subjection to that triumvirate of despots, the butler, the coachman, and the gardener. You hear the jingle of keys, the flick of the whip, and the rattle of the lawn-mower, and a cold, secret fear takes possession of you, a sort of half-frenzied impulse to flee before smug modernity takes you captive and whisks you off to play tiddledywinks or to dance the racket. But the tram is at the door. The outside fare is a penny, inside it's 2, and we are soon safe, for we have reached the point where the Lem and the Avon meet. Warwick is worth our while, for here we see scenes such as Shakespeare saw, and our delight is in the things that his eyes beheld. At the foot of Mill Street are the ruins of the old Gothic bridge that leads off to Banbury. Oft I have ridden to Banbury Cross on my mother's foot, and when I saw that sign and pointing finger I felt like leaving all and flying thence. Just beyond the bridge, settled snugly in a forest of waving branches, we see storied old Warwick Castle, with Caesar's Tower lifting itself from the massive green. All about are quaint old houses and shops, with red-tiled roofs and little windows with diamond panes, hung on hinges, where maidens fair have looked down on brave men in coats of mail. These narrow, stony streets have rung with the clang and echo of hurrying hoofs, the tramp of royalist and parliamentarian, horse and foot, drum and banner, the stir of princely visits, of mail-coach, market, assize, and kingly court, Colbrand, armed with giant club, Sir Guy, Richard Neville, kingmaker, and his barbaric train, all trod these streets, watered their horses in this river, camped on yonder bank, or huddled in this castle yard. And again they came back when Will Shakespeare, a youth from Stratford 8 miles away, came here and waved his magic wand. Warwick Castle is probably in better condition now than it was in the 16th century, but practically it is the same. It is the only castle in England where the portcullis is lowered at 10 o'clock every night and raised in the morning, if the coast happens to be clear, to tap of drum. It costs a shilling to visit the castle. A fine old soldier in spotless uniform, with waxed white mustache and dangling sword, conducts the visitors. He imparts full 2 shillings worth of facts as we go, all with a fierce roll of R's, as becomes a man of war. The long line of battlements, the massive buttresses, the angular entrance cut through solid rock, crooked, abrupt, with places where fighting men can lie in ambush, all is as Shakespeare knew it. There are the cedars of Lebanon, brought by crusaders from the east, and the screaming peacocks in the paved courtway, and in the great hall are to be seen the sword and accoutrements of the fabled Guy, the mace of the kingmaker, the helmet of Cromwell, and the armor of Lord Brooke killed at Lichfield. And that Shakespeare saw these things there is no doubt, but he saw them as a countryman who came on certain fete days and stared with open mouth. We know this because he has covered all with the glamour of his rich, boyish imagination that failed to perceive the cruel mockery of such selfish pageantry. Had his view been from the inside, he would not have made his kings noble nor his princes generous, for the stress of strife would have stilled his laughter, and from his brain the dazzling pictures would have fled. yet his fancies serve us better than the facts. Shakespeare shows us many castles, but they are always different views of Warwick and Kenilworth. When he pictures Macbeth's castle he has Warwick in his inward eye. This castle hath a pleasant seat. The air nimbly and sweetly recommends itself unto our gentle senses. This guest of summer, the temple-haunting martlet, does approve by his loved mansionry that the heaven's breath smells wooingly here. No jutty, frieze, buttress, nor coign of vantage, but this bird hath made his pendant bed and procreant cradle. Where they most breed and haunt, I have observed, the air is delicate. 5 miles from Warwick, 10 if you believe the cab-drivers, are the ruins of Kenilworth Castle. In 1575, when Shakespeare was 11 years of age, Queen Elizabeth came to Kenilworth. Whether her ticket was by way of Leamington I do not know. But she remained from July 9th to July 27th, and there were great doings most every day, to which the yeomanry were oft invited. John Shakespeare was a worthy citizen of Warwickshire, and it is very probable that he received an invitation, and that he drove over with Mary Arden, his wife, sitting on the front seat holding the baby, and all the other 7 children sitting on the straw behind. And we may be sure that the eldest boy in that brood never forgot the day. In fact, in Midsummer Night's Dream he has called on his memory for certain features of the show. Elizabeth was 41 years old then, but apparently very attractive and glib of tongue. No doubt Kenilworth was stupendous in its magnificence, and it will pay you to take down from its shelf Sir Walter's novel and read about it. But today it is all a crumbling heap. Ivy, rooks, and daws hold the place in fee, each pushing hard for sole possession. It is 8 miles from Warwick to Stratford by the direct road, but 10 by the river. I have walked both routes and consider the latter the shorter. 2 miles down the river is Barford, and a mile further is Wasperton, with its quaint old stone church. It is a good place to rest, for nothing is so soothing as a cool church where the dim light streams through colored windows, and out of sight somewhere an organ softly plays. Soon after leaving the church, a rustic swain hailed me and asked for a match. The pipe and the Virginia weed, they mean amity the world over. If I had questions to ask, now was the time. So I asked, and Rusticus informed me that Hampton Lucy was only a mile beyond, and that Shakespeare never stole deer at all, so I hope we shall hear no more of that libelous accusation. "But did Shakespeare run away?" I demanded. "Of course he did, sir. Most all good men have run away some time." And, come to think of it, Rusticus is right. Most great men have at some time departed hastily without leaving orders where to forward their mail. Indeed, it seems necessary that a man should have run away at least once, in order afterward to attain eminence. Moses, Lot, Tarquin, Pericles, Demosthenes, St. Paul, Shakespeare, Rousseau, Voltaire, Goldsmith, Hugo, but the list is too long to give. But just suppose that Shakespeare had not run away, and to whom do we owe it that he did leave? Justice Shallow or Anne Hathaway, or both? I should say to Anne first and his honor second. I think if Shakespeare could write an article for the Ladies' Home Journal on Women Who Have Helped Me, and tell the whole truth, as no man ever will in print, he would put Anne Hathaway first. He signed a bond when 18 years old agreeing to marry her. She was 26. No record is found of the marriage, but we should think of her gratefully, for no doubt it was she who started the lad off for London. That's the way I expressed it to my new-found friend, and he agreed with me, so we shook hands and parted. Charlcote is as fair as a dream of paradise. The winding Avon, full to its banks, strays lazily through rich fields and across green meadows, past the bright red brick pile of Charlcote Mansion. The river bank is lined with rushes, and in one place I saw the prongs of antlers shaking the elders. I sent a shrill whistle and a stick that way, and out ran 4 fine deer that loped gracefully across the turf. The sight brought my poacher instincts to the surface, but I bottled them and trudged on until I came to the little church that stands at the entrance to the park. All mansions, castles, and prisons in England have chapels or churches attached. And this is well, for in the good old days it seemed wise to keep in close communication with the other world. For often, on short notice, the proud scion of royalty was compelled hastily to pack a ghostly valise and hie him hence with his battered soul, or, if he did not go himself, he compelled others to do so, and who but a brute would kill a man without benefit of the clergy? So each estate hired its priests by the year, just as men with a taste for litigation hold attorneys in constant retainer. In Charlecote Church is a memorial to Sir Thomas Lucy, and there is a glowing epitaph that quite upsets any of those taunting and defaming allusions in The Merry Wives. At the foot of the monument is a line to the effect that the inscription thereon was written by the only one in possession of the facts, Sir Thomas himself. Several epitaphs in the churchyard are worthy of space in your commonplace book, but the lines on the slab to John Gibbs and his wife struck me as having the true ring. Farewell, proud, vain, false, treacherous world. We have seen enough of thee. We value not what thou canst say of we. When the Charlecote mansion was built, there was a housewarming, and good Queen Bess, who was not so awful good, came in great state. So we see that she had various calling acquaintances in these parts. But we have no proof that she ever knew that any such person as W. Shakespeare lived. However, she came to Charlecote and dined on venison, and what a pity it is that she and Shakespeare did not meet in London afterward and talk it over. Some hasty individual has put forth a statement to the effect that poets can only be bred in a mountainous country, where they could lift up their eyes to the hills. Rock and ravine, beetling crag, singing cascade, and the heights where the lightning plays and the mists hover are certainly good timber for poetry, after you have caught your poet, but nature eludes all formula. Again, it is the human interest that adds vitality to art. They reckon ill to leave man out. End of William Shakespeare, Part 1. Section 29 of Little Journeys to the Homes of the Great, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Erin Schellhase. Little Journeys to the Homes of the Great, Volume 1, by Elbert Hubbard. William Shakespeare, Part 2. Drayton before Shakespeare's time called Warwick the heart of England, and the heart of England it is today. Rich, luxuriant, slow. The great colonies of rabbits I saw at Charlecote seemed too fat to frolic, save more than to play a trick or two on the hounds that blinked in the sun. Down toward Stratford there are flat islands covered with sedge, long rows of weeping willows, low hazel, hawthorn, and places where green grow the rushes Then, if the farmer leaves a spot untilled, the dog-rose preempts the place and showers its petals on the vagrant winds. Meadow-sweet, forget-me-nots, and wild geraniums snuggle themselves below the boughs of the sturdy yews. The first glimpse we get of Stratford is the spire of Holy Trinity. Then comes the tower of the new Memorial Theater, which, by the way, is exactly like the City Hall at Dead Horse, Colorado. Stratford is just another village of Niagara Falls. The same shops, the same guides, the same hackmen, all are there save poor Low with his beadwork and sassafras. In fact, a cabby just outside of New Place offered to take me to the Whirlpool and the Canada side for $1. At least, this is what I thought he said. Of course, it is barely possible that I was daydreaming, but I think the facts are that it was he who dozed, and, waking suddenly as I passed, gave me the wrong cue. There's a Macbeth livery stable, a Falstaff bakery, and all the shops and stores keep Othello this and Hamlet that. I saw briarwood pipes with Shakespeare's face carved on the bowl, all for 1 and 6. Feather fans with advice to the players printed across the folds, the 7 ages on handkerchiefs, and souvenir spoons galore, all warranted Gorham's best. The visitor at the birthplace is given a cheerful little lecture on the various relics and curiosities as they are shown. The young ladies who perform this office are clever women with pleasant voices and big starched white aprons. I was at Stratford 4 days and went just 4 times to the old curiosity shop. Each day the same bright British damsel conducted me through and told her tale, but it was always with animation, and a certain sweet satisfaction in her mission and starched apron that was very charming. No man can tell the same story over and over without soon reaching a point where he betrays his weariness, and then he flavors the whole with a dash of contempt. But a good woman, heaven bless her, is ever eager to please. Each time when we came to that document certified by Judith Shakespeare, her X-mark, I was told that it was very probable that Judith could write, but that she affixed her name thus in merry jest. John Shakespeare could not write. We have no reason to suppose that Anne Hathaway could, and this little explanation about the daughter is so very good that it deserves to rank with the other pleasant subterfuge. The age of miracles is past, or that bit of jolly claptrap concerning the sacred baboons that are seen about certain temples in India. They can talk, explain the priests, but being wise they never do. Judith married Thomas Quiney. The only letter addressed to Shakespeare that can be found is one from the happy father of Thomas, Mr. Richard Quiney, wherein he asks for a loan of £30. Whether he was accommodated we cannot say, and if he was, did he pay it back, is a question that has caused much hot debate. But it is worthy of note that, although considerable doubt as to authenticity has smooched the other Shakespearean relics, yet the fact of the poet having been struck for a loan by Richard Quiney stands out in a solemn way as the one undisputed thing in the master's career. Little did Mr. Quiney think, when he wrote that letter, that he was writing for the ages. Philanthropists have won all by giving money, but who save Quiney has reaped immortality by asking for it? The inscription over Shakespeare's grave is an offer of reward if you do, and a threat of punishment if you don't, all in choice doggerel. Why did he not learn at the feet of Sir Thomas Lucy and write his own epitaph? But I rather guess I know why his grave was not marked with his name. He was a play actor, and the church people would have been outraged at the thought of burying a strolling player in that sacred chancel. But his son-in-law, Dr. John Hall, honored the great man and was bound he should have a worthy resting place. So at midnight, with the help of a few trusted friends, he dug the grave and lowered the dust of England's greatest son. Then they hastily replaced the stones, and over the grave they placed the slab that they had brought. Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust and close it here. Blessed be the man who spares these stones, and cursed be he who moves my bones. A threat from a ghost! Ah, no one dare molest that grave. Besides, they didn't know who was buried there. Neither are we quite sure. Long years after the interment, someone set a bust of the poet and a tablet on the wall over against the grave. Under certain circumstances, if occasion demands, I might muster a sublime conceit. But, considering the fact that 10,000 Americans visit Stratford every year, and all write descriptions of the place, I dare not, in the face of Baedeker, do it. Further than that, in every library there are Washington Irving, Hawthorne, and William Winter's 3 lachrymose but charming volumes. And I am glad to remember that the Columbus who discovered Stratford and gave it to the people was an American. I am proud to think that Americans have written so charmingly of Shakespeare. I am proud to know that at Stratford no man besides the master is as honored as Irving. And while I cannot restrain a blush for our English cousins, I am proud that over half the visitors at the birthplace are Americans, and prouder still am I to remember that they all write letters to the newspapers at home about Stratford-on-Avon. In England, poets are relegated to a corner. The earth and the fullness thereof belongs to the men who can kill. On this rock have the English state and church been built. As the tourist approaches the city of London for the first time, there are 4 monuments that probably will attract his attention. They lift themselves out of the fog and smoke and soot, and seem to struggle toward the blue. One of these monuments is to commemorate a calamity, the conflagration of 1666, and the others are in honor of deeds of war. The finest memorial in St. Paul's is to a certain eminent Irishman, Arthur Wellesley. The mines and quarries of earth have been called on for their richest contributions, and talent and skill have given their all to produce this enduring work of beauty, that tells posterity of the mighty acts of this mighty man. The rare richness and lavish beauty of the Wellington Mausoleum are only surpassed by a certain tomb in France. As an exploiter, the Corsican overdid the thing a bit, so the world arose and put him down. But, safely dead, his shade can boast a grave so sumptuous that Englishmen in Paris refuse to look upon it. But England need not be ashamed. Her land is spiked with glistening monuments to greatness gone, and on these monuments one often gets the epitomized life of the man whose dust lies below. On the carved marble to Lord Cornwallis I read that he defeated the Americans with great slaughter. And so, wherever in England I see a beautiful monument, I know that probably the inscription will tell how he defeated somebody. And one grows to the belief that, while woman's glory is her hair, man's glory is to defeat someone. And if he can defeat with great slaughter, his monument is twice as high as if he had only visited on his brother man a plain undoing. In truth, I am told by a friend who has a bias for statistics, that all the monuments above 50 feet high in England are to the honor of men who have defeated other men with great slaughter. The only exceptions to this rule are the Albert Memorial, which is a tribute of wifely affection rather than a public testament, so therefore need not be considered here, and a monument to a worthy brewer who died and left £300,000 to charity. I mentioned this fact to my friend, but he unhorsed me by declaring that modesty forbade carving truth on monuments, yet it was a fact that the brewer too had brought defeat to vast numbers and had, like Saul, slaughtered his thousands. When I visited the site of the Globe Theatre and found thereon a brewery, whose shares are warranted to make the owner rich beyond the dream of avarice, I was depressed. In my boyhood I had supposed that if ever I should reach this spot where Shakespeare's plays were first produced, I should see a beautiful park and a splendid monument, while some white-haired old patriarch would greet me and give a little lecture to the assembled pilgrims on the great man whose footsteps had made sacred the soil beneath our feet. But there is no park and no monument, and no white-haired old poet to give you welcome, only a brewery. "I'm on, but ain't it a big un?" protested an Englishman who heard my murmurs. Yes, I must be truthful. It is a big brewery, and there are 4 big bulldogs in the courtway, and there are big vats and big workmen in big aprons, and each of these workmen is allowed to drink 6 quarts of beer each day without charge, which proves that kindliness is not dead. Then there are big horses that draw the big wagons, and on the corner there is a big tap room where the thirsty are served with big glasses. The founder of this brewery became rich, and if my statistical friend is right, the owners of these mighty vats have defeated mankind with great slaughter. We have seen that, although Napoleon, the defeated, has a more gorgeous tomb than Wellington, who defeated him, yet there is consolation in the thought that although England has no monument to Shakespeare, he now has the freedom of Elysium, while the present address of the British worthies who have battened and fattened on poor humanity's thirst for strong drink, since Samuel Johnson was executor of Thrale's estate, is unknown. We have this on the authority of a solid Englishman, who says, "The virtues essential and peculiar to the exalted station of British worthy debar the unfortunate possessor from entering paradise. There is not a Lord Chancellor, a Lord Mayor, or Lord of the Chamber, or Master of the Hounds, or Beefeater in ordinary, or any sort of British bigwig, out of the whole of British beadledom, upon which the sun never sets in Elysium. This is the only dignity beyond their reach." The writer quoted is an honorable man, and I am sure he would not make this assertion if he did not have proof of the fact, so for the present I will allow him to go on his own recognizance, believing that he will adduce his documents at the proper time. But still, should not England have a fitting monument to Shakespeare? He is her one universal citizen. His name is honored in every school or college of earth where books are prized. There is no scholar in any clime who is not his debtor. He was born in England. He never was out of England. His ashes rest in England. But England's budget has never been ballasted with a single pound to help preserve inviolate the memory of her one son to whom the world uncovers. Victor Hugo has said something on this subject which runs about like this. Why a monument to Shakespeare? He is his own monument, and England is its pedestal. Shakespeare has no need of a pyramid, he has his work. What can bronze or marble do for him? Malachite and alabaster are of no avail. Jasper, serpentine, basalt, porphyry, granite, stones from Paros and marble from Carrara, they are all a waste of pains. Genius can do without them. What is as indestructible as these? The Tempest, The Winter's Tale, Julius Caesar, Coriolanus. What monument sublimer than Lear, sterner than The Merchant of Venice, more dazzling than Romeo and Juliet, more amazing than Richard III? What moon could shed about the pile a light more mystic than that of A Midsummer Night's Dream? What capital, were it even in London, could rumble around it as tumultuously as Macbeth's perturbed soul? What framework of cedar or oak will last as long as Othello? What bronze can equal the bronze of Hamlet? No construction of lime or rock, of iron and of cement is worth the deep breath of genius, which is the respiration of God through man. What edifice can equal thought? Babel is less lofty than Isaiah. Cheops is smaller than Homer. The Colosseum is inferior to Juvenal. The Giralda of Seville is dwarfish by the side of Cervantes. St. Peter's of Rome does not reach to the ankle of Dante. What architect has the skill to build a tower so high as the name of Shakespeare? Add anything, if you can, to mind. Then why a monument to Shakespeare? I answer, not for the glory of Shakespeare, but for the honor of England. End of William Shakespeare, Part 2.
Section 30 of Little Journeys to the Homes of the Great, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Little Journeys to the Homes of the Great, Volume 1, by Elbert Hubbard. Thomas Edison, Part 1. The mind cannot conceive what man will do in the 20th century with his chained lightning. Thomas A. Edison. Some years ago, a law was passed out in Ohio, making any man ineligible to act as a magistrate who had not studied law and been duly admitted to the bar. Men who had not studied law were deemed lacking in the sense of justice. This law was designed purely for one man, Samuel M. Jones of Toledo. Was ever a Jones so honored before? In Athens of old, a law was once passed declaring that every man, either of whose parents was an alien, was not a citizen and therefore ineligible to hold office. This law was aimed at the head of one man, Themistocles. "And so you are an alien?" was the taunting remark flung at the mother of Themistocles. And the Greek matron proudly answered, "Yes, I am an alien, but my son is Themistocles." Down at Lily Dale the other day, a woman told me that she had talked with the mother of Edison, and the spirit voice had said, "It is true I was a Canadian school teacher, and this at a time when very few women taught, but I am the mother of him you call Thomas A. Edison. I studied and read and wrote, and in degree I educated myself. I had great ambition. I thirsted to know, to do, to become. But I was hampered and chained by an uncongenial atmosphere. My body struggled with its bonds, so that I grew weak, worried, sick, and died, leaving my boy to struggle his way alone. My only regret at death was the thought that I was leaving my boy. I thought that through my marriage I had killed my career, sacrificed myself. But my boy became heir to all my hunger for knowledge, and he has accomplished what I dimly dreamed. He has made plain what I only guessed. From my position here I have whispered secrets to him that only the freed spirits knew. I once thought my life was a failure, but now I know that the word failure is a term used only by foolish mortals. In the universal sense there is no such thing as failure. Just here it seems to me that some one once said that we get no mind without brain. But we had here the brain of the medium, otherwise this alleged message from the spirit realm would not be ours. So we will not now tarry to discuss psychic phenomena, but go on to other things. But the woman from Lily Dale said something just the same. Edison was born in the little village of Milan, Ohio, which lies 6 miles from Norwalk on the road between Cleveland and Toledo. On the breaking out of the Civil War, the boy was 14 years old. His parents had moved to Sarnia, Canada, and then across to Port Huron. Young Edison used to ride up and down from Detroit on the passenger boats and sell newspapers. His standing with the Detroit Free Press, backed up by his good cheer and readiness to help the passengers with their babies and bundles, gave him free passage on all railroads and steamboat lines. There was a public library at Detroit where anyone could read, but books could not be taken away. All Edison's spare time was spent at the library, which to him was a gold mine. All his mother's books had been sold, stolen, or given away. And ahoy there, all you folks who have books! Do you not know what books are to a child hungry for truth that has no books? Of course you do not. Books to a boy like young Edison were treasures trove, in which is stored the learning of all great and good and wise who have ever lived. And the boy has to read, and read for a decade, in order to find that books are not much after all. When Edison saw the inside of that library, and was told he could read any or all of the books, he said, "If you please, mister, I'll begin here." And he tackled the first shelf, mentally deciding that he would go through the books 10 feet at a time. A little later he bought at an auction 50 volumes of the North American Review, and moving the books up to his home at Port Huron, proceeded to read them. The war was on. Papers sold for 10 cents each, and business was good. Edison was making money, and saving it. He only plunged on books. Over at Mount Clemens, at the Springs, folks congregated, and there young Edison took weekly trips selling papers. On one such visit he rescued the little son of the station agent from in front of a moving train. In gratitude, the man took the boy to his house and told him he must make it his home while in Mount Clemens. And then after supper the youngster went down to the station. And what was more, the station agent took him in behind the ticket window, where the telegraph instrument clicked off dots and dashes on a long strip of paper. Edison looked on with open mouth. "Would you like to become a telegraph operator?" asked the agent. "Sure," was the reply. Already the boy had read up on the subject in his library of the North American Review, and he really knew the history of the thing better than did the agent. Edison was now a newsboy on the Grand Trunk, and he arranged his route so as to spend every other night at Mount Clemens. In a few months he could handle the key about as well as the station agent. About this time the ice had carried out the telegraph line between Port Huron and Sarnia. The telegraph people were in sore straits. Edison happened along and said to the local operator, "Come out here, Bill, on this switch engine, and we'll fix things." By short snorts of the whistle for dots and long ones for dashes, they soon caught the ear of the operator on the other side. He answered back, "What t'ell is the matter with you fellows?" And Edison and the other operator roared with laughter, so that the engineer thought their think boxes needed rebabbiting. And that scheme of telegraphy with the steam whistle was Edison's first invention. Instead of going to college, Edison started a newspaper, a kind of amateur affair in which he himself wrote editorials, news items, and advertisements, this when he was 17 years old. The best way to become a skilled writer is to write, and if there is a better way to learn than by doing, the world has not yet discovered it. Also, if there is a finer advantage for a youth who would be a financier than to have a shiftless father, it has not been recorded. When 19, Edison had $2,000 in cash, more money than his father had ever seen at any one time. The Grand Trunk folks found that their ex-train boy could operate, and so they called on him to help them out up and down the line. Then the Western Union wanted extra good men, and young Edison was given double pay to go to New Orleans, where there was a pitiful dearth of operators, the Southern operators being mostly dead, and the Northern men not caring to live in the South. So Edison traveled north and south and east and west, gathering gear. He had studied the science of telegraphy closely enough to see that it could be improved upon. One message at a time for one wire was absurd. Why not 2 or 4, and why not send messages both ways at once? It was the general idea then that electricity traveled. Edison knew better. Electricity merely rendered the wire sensitive. Edison was getting a reputation among his associates. He had read everything, and when his key was not busy, there was in his hand a copy of Gibbon's Decline and Fall. He wrote a hand like a copper plate, and could take as fast as the best could send. And when it came to sending, he had made the pride of Chicago cry quits. The Western Union had need of a specially good man at Albany, where the legislature was in session, and Edison was sent there. He took the key and never looked at the clock. He cleaned up the stuff. He sat glued to his chair for 10 hours straight. At one time the line suddenly became blocked between Albany and New York. The manager was in distress, and after exhausting all known expedients went to Edison. The lanky youth called up a friend of his in Pittsburgh, and ordered that the New York give the Pittsburgh man the Albany wire. "Feel your way up the river until you find me," were the orders. Edison started feeling his way down the river. In 20 minutes he called to the manager, "The break is 2 miles below Poughkeepsie. I've ordered the section boss at Poughkeepsie to take a repairer on his handcar and go and fix it." Of course, this plain telegraph operator had no right to order out a section boss, but nevertheless he did it. He shouldered responsibility like Tom Potter of the C.B.&Q. Not long after the Albany experience, Edison was in New York, not looking for work as some say, but nosing around Wall Street investigating the Law's automatic ticker. The machine he was looking at suddenly stopped, and this blocked all the tickers on the line. An expert was sent for, but he could not start it. "I'll fix it," said a tall, awkward volunteer, the same which was Edison. History is not yet clear as to whether Edison had not originally fixed it, and Edison so far has not confessed. And there being no one else to start the machine, Edison was given a chance, and soon the tickers were going again. This gave him an introduction to the stock ticker folks, and the Western Union people he already knew. This was in 1870, and Edison was then 23 years old. He studied out how stock reporting could be bettered and invented a plan which he duly patented, and then laid his scheme before the Western Union managers. A stock company was formed, and young Edison, aged 24, was paid exactly $40,000 for his patent, and retained by the company as electrical advisor at $300 a month. In 1874, when he was 27, he had perfected his duplex telegraph apparatus and had a factory turning out telegraph instruments and appliances at Newark, New Jersey, where 300 men were employed. In 1876, the year of the Centennial Exposition, Edison told the exposition managers that if they could wait a year or so, he would light their show with electricity. He moved to the then secluded spot of Menlo Park to devote himself to experiments, spending an even $100,000 in equipment as a starter. Results followed fast, and soon we had the incandescent lamp, trolley car, electric pen, and many other inventions. It was on the night of October the 23rd, 1879, that Edison first turned the current through an incandescent burner and got the perfect light. He sat and looked at the soft, mild, beautiful light, and laughed a joyous peal of laughter that was heard in the adjoining rooms. "We've got it, boys!" he cried, and the boys, a dozen of them, came tumbling in. Arguments started as to how long it would last. One said an hour. 24 hours, said Edison. They all vowed they would watch it without sleep until the carbon film was destroyed and the light went out. It lasted just 40 hours. Around Edison grew up a group of great workers, proud to be called Edison men, and some of these went out and made for themselves names and fortunes. Edison was born in 1847. Consequently, at this writing, he is 63 years old. He is big and looks awkward, because his dusty gray clothes do not fit, and he walks with a slight stoop. When he wants clothes, he telephones for them. His necktie is worn by the right oblique, his iron gray hair is combed by the wind. On his cherubic face usually sits a half-quizzical, pleased smile that fades into a look plaintive and very gentle. The face is that of a man who has borne burdens and known sorrow, of one who has overcome only after mighty effort. I was going to say that Edison looks like a Roman emperor, but I recall that no Roman emperor deserves to rank with him, not even Julius Caesar. The face is that of Napoleon at St. Helena, unsubdued. The predominant characteristics of the man are his faith, hope, good cheer, and courage. But at all times his humor is apt to be near the surface. Had Edison been as keen a businessman as Rockefeller, and kept his own in his own hands, he would today be as rich as Rockefeller. But Edison is worth, say $2 million, and that is all any man should be worth. It is all he needs. Yet there are at least 100 men in the world today, far richer than Edison, who have made their fortunes wholly and solely by appropriating his ideas. Edison has trusted people, and some of them have taken advantage of his great, big, generous, boyish spirit to do him grievous wrong. But the nearest I ever heard him come to making a complaint was when he said to me, "Fra Albertus, you never wrote but one really true thing." Well, what was that, Mr. Edison? You said, "There is one thing worse than to be deceived by men, and that is to distrust them." Now, people say I have been successful, and so I have, in degree, and it has been through trusting men. There are a few fellows who always know just what I am doing. I confide in them. I explain things to them just to straighten the matter out in my own mind. But of the men who have used Edison's money and ideas, who have made it a life business to study his patents and then use them, evading the law, not a word. From 1870 to 1890, Edison secured over 900 patents, or at the rate of one patent every 10 days. Very few indeed of these patents ever brought him any direct return, and now his plan is to invent and keep the matter a secret in his family. "The value of an idea lies in the using of it," he said to me. "You patent a thing and the other fellow starts even with you. Keep it to yourself and you have the machinery going before the other fellow is awake. Patents may protect some things, and still others they only advertise. Up in Buffalo you have a great lawyer who says he can drive a coach and four through any will that was ever made, and I guess he can. All good lawyers know how to break wills and contracts, and there are now specialists who secure goodly fees for busting patents. If you have an idea, go ahead and invent a way to use it, and keep your process secret." End of Thomas Edison, Part 1. Section 31 of Little Journeys to the Homes of the Great, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Little Journeys to the Homes of the Great, Volume 1, by Elbert Hubbard. Thomas A. Edison, Part 2. The Edison factories at West Orange cover a space of about 30 acres, all fenced in with high pickets and barbed wire. Over 2,000 people are employed inside that fence. There are guards at the gates, and the would-be visitor is challenged as if he were an enemy. If you want to see any particular person, you do not go in and see him. He comes to you, and you sit in a place like the visitor's dock at Sing Sing. With me it was different. I had a note that made the gates swing wide. However, one gatekeeper scrutinized the note and scrutinized me, and then went back into a maze of buildings for advice. When he came back, the general manager was with him, and was reproving him. In a voice full of defense, the county down watchman said, "Ah, now, and how did I know but that it was a forgery? And anyhow, I'd never let in a man what looks like that, even if he had an order from Bill Taft." The Edison factories, all enclosed in the high fence and under guard, include 4 separate and distinct corporations, each with its own set of offices. Edison himself owns a controlling interest in each corporation, and the rest of the stock is owned by the managers or "family." With his few trusted helpers he is most liberal. Not only do they draw goodly salaries, but they have an interest in the profits that is no small matter. The secrets of the place are protected by having each workman stick right to one thing and work in one room. No running around is allowed. Each employee goes to a certain place and remains there all day. To be found elsewhere is a misdemeanor, and while spies at the Edison factory are not shot, they have been known to disappear into space with great velocity. To make amends for the close restrictions on workers, an extra wage is paid and the 8-hour day prevails, so help is never wanting. 99 workers out of 100 want their wages, and nothing else. Promotion, advancement, and education are things that never occur to them. But for the few that have the stuff in them, Edison is always on the lookout. His place is really a college, for to know the man is an education. He radiates good cheer, and his animation is catching. To a woman who wanted him to write a motto for her son, Edison wrote, "Never look at the clock." The argument is plain, get the thing done. And around the Edison laboratory there is no use of looking at the clock, for none of them runs. That is the classic joke of the place. Years ago Edison expressed his contempt for the man who watched the clock, and now every Christmas his office family take up a collection and buy him a clock, and present it with great ceremony. He replies in a speech on the nebular hypothesis, and all are very happy. One year the present assumed the form of an Ingersoll dollar watch, which the wizard showed to me with great pride. In the stockade is a beautiful library building, and here you see clocks galore, some of which must have cost $1,000 apiece, all silent. One clock had a neatly printed card attached. "Don't look at this clock, it has stopped." And another, "You may look at this clock, for you can't stop it." It was already stopped. One very elegant clock had a solid block of wood where the works should have been, but the face and golden hands were all complete. However, one clock was running, with a tick needlessly loud, but this clock had no hands. The Edison Library is a gigantic affair, with 2 balconies and book stacks limitless. The intent was to have a scientific library right at hand that would compass the knowledge of the world. The laboratory is quite as complete, for in it is every chemical substance known to man, all labeled, classified, and indexed. Seemingly, Edison is the most careless, indifferent, and slipshod of men, but the real fact is that such a thorough business general the world has seldom seen. If he wants, say, the Electrical Review for March, 1891, he hands the boy a slip of paper and the book is in his hands in 5 minutes. Edison, of all men, understands that knowledge consists in having a clerk who can quickly find the thing. In his hands the card index has reached perfection. Edison has no private office, and his desk in the great library has not had a letter written on it since 1895. "I hate to disturb the mice," he said, as he pointed it out indifferently. He arrives at the stockade early, often by 7 o'clock, and makes his way direct to the laboratory, which stands in the center of the campus. All around are high factory buildings, vibrating with the suppressed roar and hum of industry. In the laboratory Edison works, secure and free from interruption unless he invites it. Much of his time is spent in the chemical building, a low, one-story structure, lighted from the top. It has a cement floor and very simple furniture, the shelves and tables being mostly of iron. "We are always prepared for fires and explosions here," said Edison in half apology for the barrenness of the rooms. The place is a maze of retorts, kettles, tubes, siphons, and tiny brass machinery. In the midst of the mess stood 2 old-fashioned armchairs, both sacred to Edison. One he sits in, and the other is for his feet, his books, pads, and paper. Here he sits and thinks, reads, or muses, or tells stories, or shuffles about with his hands in his pockets. Edison is a man of infinite leisure. He has the faculty of throwing details upon others. At his elbow, shod in sneakers silent, is always a stenographer. Then there is a bookkeeper who does nothing but record the result of every experiment, and these experiments are going on constantly, attended to by half a dozen quiet and alert men who work like automatons. "I have tried a million schemes that will not work. I know everything that is no good. I work by elimination," says Edison. When hot on the trail of an idea, he may work here for 3 days and nights without going home, and his wife is good enough and great enough to leave him absolutely to himself. In a little room in the corner of the laboratory is a little iron cot and 3 gray army blankets. He can sleep at any time, and half an hour's rest will enable him to go on. When he can't quite catch the idea, he closes up his brain cells for 10 minutes and sleeps, then up and after it again. Mrs. Edison occasionally sends meals down for the wizard when he is on the trail of a thought and does not want to take time to go home. One day the dinner arrived when Edison was just putting salt on the tail of an idea. There was no time to eat, but it occurred to the inventor that if he would just quit thinking for 10 minutes and sleep, he could awaken with enough brain power to throw the lariat successfully. So he just leaned back, put his feet in the other chair, and went to sleep. The general manager came in and saw the dinner on the table and Edison sleeping, so he just sat down and began to eat the dinner. He ate it all and tiptoed out. Edison slept 20 minutes, awoke, looked at the empty dishes, pulled down his vest, took out his regular after-dinner cigar, lighted it, and smoked away in sweet satisfaction, fully believing that he had had his dinner. And even after the general manager had come in and offered to bet him $1 he hadn't, he was still of the same mind. This spirit of sly joking fills the place, set afloat by the master himself. Edison dearly loves a joke, and will quit work any time to hear one. It is the 5 minutes' sleep and the good laugh that keep his brain from becoming a hot box. He gets his rest. "When do you take your vacation, Mr. Edison?" a lady asked him. "Election night every November," was the reply. And this is literally true, for on that night there is a special wire run into the Orange Club House, and Edison takes the key and sits there until daylight taking the returns, writing them out carefully in that copperplate Western Union hand. He is as careful about his handwriting now as if he were writing out train orders. "If I wanted to live 100 years, I would use neither tobacco nor coffee," said Edison as we sat at lunch. "But you see I'd rather get a little really good work done than live long and do nothing to speak of. And so I spur what I am pleased to call my mind, at times with coffee and a good cigar. Just pass the matches, thank you. Some day some fellow will invent a way of concentrating and storing up sunshine to use instead of this old, absurd Prometheus scheme of fire. I'll do the trick myself if someone else doesn't get at it. Why, that is all there is about my work in electricity. You know I never claimed to have invented electricity. That is a campaign lie. Nail it. Sunshine is spread out thin, and so is electricity. Perhaps they are the same, but we will take that up later. Now the trick was, you see, to concentrate the juice and liberate it as you need it. The old-fashioned way inaugurated by Jove, of letting it off in a clap of thunder, is dangerous, disconcerting, and wasteful. It doesn't fetch up anywhere. My task was to divide the current and use it in a great number of little lights, and to do this I had to store it. And we haven't really found out how to store it yet and let it off real easy like and cheap. Why, we have just begun to commence to get ready to find out about electricity. This scheme of combustion to get power makes me sick to think of. It is so wasteful. It is just the old, foolish Prometheus idea, and the father of Prometheus was a baboon. When we learn how to store electricity, we will cease being apes ourselves. Until then, we are tailless orangutans. You see, we should utilize natural forces and thus get all of our power. Sunshine is a form of energy, and the winds and the tides are manifestations of energy. Do we use them? Oh, no. We burn up wood and coal, as renters burn up the front fence for fuel. We live like squatters, not as if we owned the property. There must surely come a time when heat and power will be stored in unlimited quantities in every community, all gathered by natural forces. Electricity ought to be as cheap as oxygen, for it cannot be destroyed. Now, I am not sure but that my new storage battery is the thing. I'd tell you about that, but I don't want to bore you. Of course, I know that nothing is more interesting to the public than a good lie. You see, I have been a newspaper man myself, used to run a newspaper. In fact, Veritas, an old subscriber, once took exception to one of my editorials and threw me into the Detroit River. That is where I got my little deafness. What's that? No, I did not say my deftness. I got that in another way. But about lies, you have heard that one about my smoking big black cigars. Well, the story is that the boys in the office used to steal my cigars, and so I got a cigar maker to make me up a box that looked just like my favorite brand, only I had 'em filled with hemp, horsehair, and a touch of asafoetida. Then I just left the box where the boys would be sure to dip into it. But it seems the cigar man put them on, and so they just put that box into my own private stock, and I smoked the fumigators and never knew the difference. That whole story is a pernicious malrepresentation invented by the enemy of mankind in order to throw obloquy over a virtuous old telegraph operator. Brand it. Witness, therefore, that I have branded it forevermore. Once upon a day I wrote an article on Alexander Humboldt, and in that article, among other things, I said, "This world of ours, round like an orange and slightly flattened at the poles, has produced but 5 educated men." And ironical ladies and gents from all parts of the United States wrote me on postal cards, begging that I should name the other 4. Let us leave the cynics to their little pleasantries, and make our appeal to people who think. Education means evolution, development, growth. Education is comparative, for there is no fixed standard. All men know more than some men, and some men know more than some other men. Every man I meet is my master in some particular, said Emerson. But there are 5 men in history who had minds so developed, and evolved beyond the rest of mankind so far, that they form a class by themselves, and deserve to be called educated men. The men I have in mind were the following: Pericles, builder of Athens; Aristotle, tutor of Alexander and the world's first naturalist; Leonardo, the all-round man, the man who could do more things, and do them well, than any other man who ever lived; Sir Isaac Newton, the mathematician, who analyzed light and discovered the law of gravitation; Alexander von Humboldt, explorer and naturalist, who compassed the entire scientific knowledge of the world, issued his books in deluxe limited editions at his own expense, and sold them for $3,000 a set. Newton and Humboldt each wore a 7 3/4 hat. Leonardo and Aristotle went untaped, but Pericles had a head so high and so big that he looked like a caricature, and Aristophanes, a nice man who lived at the same time, said that the head of Pericles looked like a pumpkin that had been sat upon. All the busts of Pericles represent him wearing a helmet, this to avoid what the artists thought an abnormality, the average Greek having a round, smooth chuckle-head like that of a Bowery bartender. America has produced two men who stand out so far beyond the rest of mankind that they form a class by themselves, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas A. Edison. Franklin wore a 7½ hat. Edison wears a 7 3/4. The difference in men is the difference in brain power. And while size does not always token quality, yet size and surface are necessary to get power, and there is no record of a man with a 6½ head ever making a ripple in the intellectual sea. Without the cells you get no mind, and if mind exists without the cells, it has not yet been proven. The brain is a storage battery made up of millions of minute cells. The weight of an average man's brain is 49 ounces. Now Humboldt's brain weighed 56 ounces, and Newton's and Franklin's weighed 57. Let us hope the autopsist will not have a chance to weigh Edison's brain for many years, but when he does the mark will register 57 ounces. The orangutan weighs about the same as a man, but its brain weighs only a pound, against 3 pounds for a man. Give a gorilla a brain weighing 50 ounces, and he would be a Methodist presiding elder. Give him the brain the same size of Edison's, say 57 ounces, and instead of spending life in hunting for snakes and heaving coconuts at monkeys as respectable gorillas are wont, he would be weighing the world in scales of his own invention and making, and measuring the distances of the stars. Pericles was taught by the gentle Anaxagoras, who gave all his money to the state in order that he might be free. The state reciprocated by cutting off his head, for republics are always ungrateful. Aristotle was a pupil of Plato, and worked his way through college, sifting ashes, washing windows, and sweeping sidewalks. Leonardo was self-taught and gathered knowledge as a bee gathers honey, although honey isn't honey until the bee digests it. Sir Isaac Newton was a Cambridge man. He held the office of Master of the Mint, and to relieve himself of the charge of atheism he anticipated the enemy and wrote a book on the Hebrew prophets, which gave the scientists the laugh on him, but made his position with the state secure. Newton is the only man herein mentioned who knew anything about theology, all the others being infidels in their day, devoting themselves strictly to this world. Humboldt was taught by the natural method, and never took a college degree. Franklin was a graduate of the University of Hard Knocks, and Edison's alma mater is the same. There is one special characteristic manifested by the 7 educated men I have named: good cheer, a great welling sense of happiness. They were all good animals. They gloried in life. They loved the men and women who were still on earth. They feasted on the good things in life, breathed deeply, slept soundly, and did not bother about the future. Their working motto was, "One world at a time." They were all able to laugh. Genius is a great fund of joyousness. Each and all of these men influenced the world profoundly. We are different people because they lived. Every house, school, library, and workshop in Christendom is touched by their presence. All are dead but Edison, yet their influence can never die. And no one in the list has influenced civilization so profoundly as Edison. You cannot look out of a window in any city in Europe or America without beholding the influence of his thought. You may say that the science of electricity has gone past him, but all the sons of Jove have built on him. He gave us the electric light and the electric car, and pointed the way to the telephone, 3 things that have revolutionized society. As Athens at her height was the age of Pericles, so will our time be known as the age of Edison. So here endeth Little Journeys to the Homes of Good Men and Great, being Volume 1 of the series, as written by Elbert Hubbard, edited and arranged by Fred Bann, borders and initials by Roycroft Artists, and produced by the Roycrofters, at their shops, which are in East Aurora, Erie County, New York, 1922. End of Thomas A. Edison Part 2. End of Little Journeys to the Homes of the Great, Volume 1, by Elbert Hubbard.